Thank you.
Hello, I actually see a few familiar faces. I'm very happy to be back. My name is Natalie Molina Nino. I started my career in grad school. I started at .com purely by accident, a story for another day. And then sold it before the .com crash, was involved in a few other ventures. The most fun one thus far, until now, of course, I think the one I'm currently in is the most fun, was one where we became a part of Lionbridge Technologies. For those of you that have worked at Microsoft or done anything global, you know that Lionbridge is a very large globalization company. We were at one point Microsoft's 6th largest vendor in any category. Apart from globalization, we got involved in crowdsourcing and relevance testing for people like Google and Bing. At the point of about $100 million in terms of the growth of that business, I got burnt out. I decided to take a sabbatical that was supposed to be a 1-year-long sabbatical. It turned into 4. I decided to go back to school. I went to Columbia University and I studied playwriting because people used to refer to me as a technologist that was very good at telling the story of technology. And I think that since we're in a closed room, I used to say that it's very easy to be called a great storyteller in an environment where we are not good at storytelling. So I wanted to go and hang out with real storytellers and learn how to do what they do. And so I spent the last 3.5 years working on that. And in the process, because I'm used to working the way that you work, which is to say not really stopping, I had extra time. And what I did is I started a center. It's called Entrepreneurs at Athena. It's a part of the Athena Center for Leadership Studies at Barnard at Columbia University. And it's a center dedicated entirely to leveling the playing field for women entrepreneurs. One of the things that happened during the course of the development of the center, though, is I couldn't get away from tech. I had a professor come and truly make a nuisance of herself until we listened to her about the problem with women in tech on campus, the problem of the fact that 55% of all women, whether they were Barnard or Columbia, were dropping out of the intro computer science classes within the first 2 weeks. And nobody was doing anything about it, and what could we do? And I kept saying, look, I'm focused on women entrepreneurs. I understand that women in tech is a part of that, but it's a subset, and not all entrepreneurial ventures are tech. And so I want to focus more broadly. And I avoided it as long as I could, but in fact, that is where my heart is. And so through that program, we've developed a series of things. The most notable one is an organization called Athena Digital Design. We teach college women to code. We do what I call is the gateway drug, HTML, CSS. Within the first 10 weeks, they learn how to make their first website. If they succeed at doing that, then they have the option of joining this agency. It's called Athena Digital Design. And the agency is in the business of doing small rudimentary websites for local businesses, 60% of which are not online even today. So these students feel like they're doing something good for the community. They're learning to code. If they get a taste for it and they love it, they keep learning more. And if they don't, you've got a bunch of liberal arts students who now know how to do basic coding. Everybody wins. Their first website was Malala's. I wanted to be sure that we got them a first client that would make some waves. And then most recently, as was inevitable, as my role has been structured, and the way that I structure my life is I have exposure to amazing women entrepreneurs every day. It was inevitable that I would fall in love with one of them. And one of the reasons that I'm really happy to have Naomi here today with me is that Naomi brought to my desk one in particular called Power to Fly. And it's a startup that focuses on essentially building a marketplace for companies to get matched up with amazing women professionals. We started off doing tech only. We've now branched out to all sorts of things that are not tech specific. But essentially, we are a platform that connects people to professionals all over the world, so long as the company is willing to work with remote workers and provide them flexible work environments. And the unique value proposition of this business is that there are a few marketplaces like this around, but Power to Fly is currently in 92 countries. We have over 40,000 people on the platform. Again, not all tech. And we vet everybody's code before they actually get matched with an employer, if they're a coder. And most importantly, all 40,000 plus people on this platform are women, and only women.
Yay. Awesome. Okay. Awesome. So I'm Naomi Wolf. You'll forgive me, I'm going to stand up and walk around a little bit because I've been sitting in an airplane for a long time and other reasons. And I'm delighted to be here. If many of you may not be familiar with my work or why I would be here, because I'm not from a tech or engineering or other super smart kind of things I wasn't raised to understand sort of world. I'm a writer of nonfiction, and I'm going to do something now that's very socially unacceptable. I'm going to name my accomplishments, and there's a reason for that we'll get to later in the conversation. But I wrote 8 best-selling nonfiction books. I've had 3 globally syndicated columns. I've written for every major newspaper and magazine in the West and North America, I should say North America, and Western Europe. And I started a nonprofit, and I am also at the Athena Center for Leadership Studies. The reason, well, I'll tell you later about why I just did that unfeminine thing. But the reason I'm here and what we're going to do is kind of introduce ourselves, and then we've identified 3 questions we want to ask ourselves that has to do with the issue of women engaging in the tech space in a male-dominated environment, which is the subject of this talk. But the reason I'm here is that I've spent 25 years in the media, and I'm now transitioning into also launching a startup, incredibly, not because I have these skills to build it, but because I have an amazing team.
A tech startup.
A tech startup, yes, thank you. An amazing team, and it's called dailyclout.com. And what it's going to do very briefly, or what it does, is it is a democracy-building platform that scrapes live data online 24 hours a day of legislation, makes it searchable by keyword, and then turns that into HTML code, which is something I learned to understand in my 50s, right? That you cut and paste, and you can put it in the back of any blog or news article, and it opens up with the results of your search. So you've got an article in The Guardian about Obamacare, there's the live legislation, and then the next build, which we're engaging in now, you can populate it with comments. Organizations can populate the bill with comments. You can send it flying through social media, generating action steps that have political and social impact. So it turns the news into a platform for action, and it turns social sharing into political action. But let's go right. So what we thought we'd do is ask each other these 3 questions, which really illuminate things we've learned from our own careers in these different spaces about how to be, I'm going to do this unfeminine thing again, successful woman in an environment that often doesn't want you to be a successful woman, or doesn't want to make it that easy for you. You know, this is a reality many of us know about or have encountered. And we're going to share the insights that we realized we had watching the women around us and also looking at our own lives. And then we're going to open it up for discussion, because we feel that concrete examples are really best when women are learning to negotiate these sometimes very tricky spaces. So, and then I'm going to stop my intro of myself by confessing that when Natalie and I were sitting in the hotel lobby this morning writing out the notes for our talk, we realized that really what we were talking about after asking each other these questions a couple of times is the insights of I'm a bitch, you're a bitch. Secrets of highly successful women.
That's it. You're a bitch, I'm a bitch. Secrets of highly successful women. Right. We decided maybe that should be a book.
It's got to be a book.
Yeah.
So let's start with number 1. Go ahead, Natalie. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to add a little bit more to the intro about the research at the Athena Center. And please chime in if I don't cover it all. But research at the Athena Center, which is like a think tank for women in the workplace and women in leadership, shows that when you survey women themselves, so this is their own self-reporting, and at Athena, we did a ginormous survey with the women of Hershey, for example, and it was 600 women answering, and other quite big surveys, which very few people actually do. When in doubt, listen to women, see what women have to say. What a revolutionary concept. Women report themselves that the shortcomings that they feel they have in the workplace, apart from the things that are unfair in the workplace, which is another survey, is they identified issues of a sense of deficit with confidence, with self-promotion and negotiation, and finally with strategic vision and risk-taking. So our 3 questions have to do with those areas. Do you want to add anything to that, or go right into the question? Do you guys mind if I take my jacket off?
Oh,
Wired.
the speaker.
It's very warm. Yeah, I'll
Should we remove the
detach it.
speaker?
I'll remove it. Go ahead.
Okay, no worries. Well, while you're doing that, we wanted to talk about how we deal with issues of confidence, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about that in terms of my own experience. But one thing that I'm a student of all sorts of leadership schools, and I think that all of them add value. There's a woman that I admire quite a bit named Gloria Feldt. She was the president of Planned Parenthood for a number of years, and she was at a time that was rife with a lot of controversy as well. I think it was shortly after the '92 Supreme Court legislation, right? The Planned Parenthood versus Casey case that ultimately saved Roe v. Wade. And one of the things that she teaches in terms of one of her modules is embracing controversy. And so really I wanted to start with that question, and that is that those of us that lead and those of us that live in the world at some point have to make controversial decisions. It isn't for the purpose of being controversial, it's simply because sometimes you have to make decisions and not everybody likes those decisions. And I think that I certainly, and I think that most women that I work with have that desire to want to please, and those decisions are hard to make. But in the media, unlike in corporate, where you don't behave controversially for the sake of it, you're really just having to deal with that from time to time. In the media, it's even more extreme in that you might even learn to embrace it, if not embrace it, at least be willing to take a lot of controversy coming your way. I don't know very many people who have had to deal as much as you have had to deal with. And so I think that that's my first question to you is, for those of us, whether we have to deal with it a lot in the media or less frequently, but just as impactful in corporate, how do you handle controversy?
Thank you, Natalie, for asking. And when you were talking, I realized, gee, I'd hoped that I would get the first question into Natalie, which is, how did you get to not have these issues with confidence that so many women have? And it was at this point that we were both formulating our first question that we realized that neither of us care that much about what other people think about us in the ways we're expected to, which led to the I'm a bitch, you're a bitch insight. But let me speak to that, and then you have to answer my question. Sure. So it is true, again, those of you who are not familiar with my work, and there's no reason everyone should be, except that my grandmother wants you to be. I did, with many of these books that I've written and many articles, or things I've said on television, to my astonishment, I regularly seem to be in the center of a firestorm of controversy. And I would gently challenge Natalie, because I certainly don't seek it out. I mean, some people in the media do, like Lady Gaga wears meat, she wants a debate, right? I'm not doing that. I'm just literally saying things that seem obvious and commonsensical to me. Now, I had a very weird upbringing for a girl, which is that my parents listened to me and treated me as if my voice and my opinions mattered. So I was very blessed, because many, many issues that women struggle with, even before they get to generating controversy or opposition, is literally speaking out loud in their own voices, or even one step back, knowing what their opinions are. Because if you've been raised, which is so much more common, with people around you saying, who wants to hear from the peanut gallery, or you're too big for your britches, or what makes you think you're an expert, or all of the various ways culture or people or parents demean and diminish girls and their voices and their opinions. Boys face stuff like this too, but it's particularly specific to women and their opinions. Then by the time they get to be young adults, you get the situation with even op-eds, where op-ed writers can't fill their pages with enough opinions from women, because only a third of the submissions they get are from women. And even when they reach out to women to say, will you write this piece, women say, I'm not an expert, go talk to Biff, right? So that was a blessing. But then into confidence, I was also controversy. I was very lucky to go to 2 good universities, but one of them, Oxford, has a very ancient tradition of actually creating a climate where whatever you ask, you can ask, as long as it's, or whatever you hypothesize or propose to investigate or even conclude, you can put out there as long as you have evidence to back it up or can make a reasoned argument about it. It's really the Socratic tradition. So I was a Rhodes Scholar, and I had that experience. And so that gave me a sense of entitlement. You know, my parents in Oxford kind of gave me a sense of entitlement for the rest of my life of, well, I can ask this because here's all this evidence that shows that it's a reasonable thing to ask, or I can draw this conclusion because I have 400 fucking footnotes, pardon me. So, you know, and they all check out. So I'm sorry. So that I'm always astonished when I'll say something that's reasonable to ask, or or make a conclusion that I can show you transparently the masses of research, the facts that this is based on, and then someone will say, "How dare Naomi Wolf say X?" So I don't seek out controversy. Now, when I experience controversy, it is not fun. I don't enjoy it, but I don't feel like I'm going to die the way I did when I was 26, when my first book came out and people were yelling at me. Barbara Walters was yelling at me, and I thought my career was over, and I would, you know, there was no point. Like, this is what young women feel when they're criticized. Like, it's worse to be out there having people criticize you and be visible than to be home, invisible, silent, with my boyfriend comforting me, right? So I guess what I learned, and I'm going to fast forward, is that you don't die of it, and that my career didn't end. And in fact, the controversy, you know, helped me sharpen my arguments, led to the next book and the next book. Not just the controversy, but that with controversy comes readers and people who love what you have to say, and people who might initially hate it, but then think about it and think it's got merit. And that, you know, I'm going to say now something else very taboo, which is I love having a global voice on behalf of women and other forms of social injustice. I absolutely love it. Like, you're not allowed to say, if you're a powerful or successful woman, how much fun it is. And it's super fun to be really powerful in my field. So that's reinforcing. Too, right now I'm in a fight with Time magazine that I don't really want to get into, but the reason I can hang in there and not give up and go through a stressful week is that I know that this has happened many times before. It's not going to kill me, and the benefit of hanging in there and walking through the storm with my eyes on the prize, not selling out, not silencing myself, backing up what I have to say with data and evidence and maintaining some dignity, pays off. And so now let me ask my question to you. I hear all the time when I train women this, you know, variations of, I don't know, I'm so embarrassed, I feel so shy, I can't stand up, don't call on me. And here comes Natalie Molina Nino into my office, and she absolutely does all the things I try to train young women to do. She speaks clearly and confidently. She doesn't apologize for herself. She projects authority. You've never heard me say this, but I think it. And she's quite sure of herself, and is not hesitant to explain the reasons that she's sure. And so fabulous things come to her because, and I keep trying to explain this to young women, a big company or an investor or a nonprofit organization, if they're going to give you $250,000 to build your dream, they have to see you be an authority figure. And you can be an authority figure, whoever you are, whatever background, if you're 26, if you're 85. So why do you have that kind of confidence? Where did you learn it? What did your parents do? What blessed you with this? What can we learn from it?
I just want to say one of the things that you were mentioning in terms of you can lead in various different ways, especially now working with students. That's a really important piece for me, is that I want to talk about my personal experience, but I also try to bring into, for example, my classroom, people who lead and who are introverts. People who lead and don't necessarily follow the sort of stereotypical mold of being extroverted and being, I suppose, the stereotype of what a leader looks like. So that's important. I would say my mother. My mother always, she used to teach me little tricks about, during a layover flying where you have, 10 hours in Miami between flights, go to the, Coral Gables Ritz Hotel, walk in like you own the place, walk straight into the spa, and guess what? You get a free spa day. Who knew this? But if you walk in meekly looking like you have no idea where you're going, that's not really going to work as well. And so that's an important piece. It's also an important piece that I think is even more, and this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, It's even more important when you are a person of color. It's even more important when you come from an identity of being a minority. I grew up in Los Angeles, where my mother and I have recently revisited what used to happen when I was a kid, which was totally unconscious. We've since discussed that my mother and I would unwittingly lower our voices when we were in a public place speaking Spanish to each other, because we only spoke Spanish to each other. English was a language that you spoke out in public with other people, but at home we spoke exclusively Spanish, and we'd be at a department store and my mother would say, you know, pass this or look at that, and I confronted her, I remember, and we discussed it. We were like, do you remember that this is how we worked? This was sort of our modus operandi. We would go out in public, and when we were talking amongst ourselves, we would lower our voices. Do you know that in New York City, Spanish people don't lower their voices? This is not normal. This is a distinctive California, Los Angeles thing. And we grew up with this, and it's not okay. You know, and we had a really great conversation around that. So, you know, I do think it started with my mother. I do think it continued in that because of the dot-com boom, because in 1996, any idiot who could write a couple lines of code, myself included, was given venture capital and told to start companies, and I did. And I think that meant that a lot of the time, you know, I was the 20-year-old in the room that was too young, that didn't belong, that didn't really know what she was doing, but I had to be in positions where I had to pretend that I did. And I would say that is probably the thing that is the most continuous thread throughout my life, is that I have either put myself in or have been put in positions where I didn't actually know what I was talking about, and I had to pretend that I did. Or I had to learn strategies like being very specific, like any good liar has to be.
So let me ask a follow-up question, right? You gave a really concrete example of that during our talk. Can you repeat it?
Being in the room, whether I was in front of investors or I was in front of clients, I was in front of people at Microsoft who wanted to know the answer to a question today, I became really good at saying, I don't know the answer to that, but I will know by tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and I will give you 2 different solutions and you can choose from those 2. I basically just pulled that out of my ass. 5 o'clock was arbitrary. The fact that there were going to be 2 solutions, it could have been 3, it could have been not, you know. But I just made up specific things so that it really sounded like I knew what I was talking about. And tomorrow at 5, you know, and then it turns out tomorrow at 5 is not possible, fine. Or tomorrow I could actually get it sooner than that. Or in some cases when I knew that it was very clear, and we all know what situations we're in, where you feel it in your gut, you know when you can say, I don't know and I'll get back to you, which is too unspecific. You have to be more specific than that. But you also know when there are times where you really can't get away with saying, I don't know. And I learned to say, here's the answer. And then follow up with an email 2 hours later and say, I was wrong. Oops. I'm so sorry. I told you that number was 5 million. It turns out I went to the office and I checked that, and you know, here's the real answer. But in the room, in front of all of those people, in that real estate that cannot be replicated except for in the moment, I won.
Yeah. This is a great transition to the next question, and I just want to validate what she's saying from a media perspective.
It doesn't work so well if I was to just make up a number.
No, but
on TV.
the thing about I was actually going to draw from it the message about being concrete. One of the things that women tend, and I'm making gross generalizations, plenty of men do this too, women tend to be vague and generalize in their speaking and self-presentation. And I was also getting twitchy when it was 2:06, because one of the things when I'm teaching women's empowerment is be on time to every opportunity. And it's not that I'm a stickler for punctuality. I'm actually a hippie from San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury actually, but we were stoned all the time, but no one was on time. But where I'm going with this is that when you're highly visible and highly influential, or the way you get there is by treating every opportunity, and I think this is what you were addressing, as important, and treating yourself as a star. And a star is a serious person with something serious to contribute. So that means showing up on time, writing the thank you note, not just a thank you email, you know, sending it in without typos. The example I give in op-ed writing is if the editor says 800 words, send it in 800 words. Don't send it in at 1,200, because then they'll never call you again and you'll never know why. So when women treat themselves like they're important, and show up, essentially, and show up in concrete and specific ways, concrete and specific words, concrete and specific examples, they're much more likely to have doors open for them. So that's a transition to the next point, which is In the research at Athena, women also scored themselves as needing more work on self-promotion and negotiation. These are not the same things, but they're related. And so you wanted to ask me to give some concrete examples of how women undermine themselves on this front?
Yeah, I wanted us to revisit, I guess, the problem before we get into the solution. And it seems to me that on the problem side, we have two camps, and I'd love to cover both. So one is how we women undermine ourselves and each other, but also when we're done with that, I'd love to spend a little bit of time on what we see in the environments in our workplaces, what sort of contexts men sometimes create to undermine as well, and then we can get into sort of how we handle those and some strategies. So maybe first would just be how we undermine ourselves.
Sure.
Some examples from your experience.
Thank you so much for letting me share and vent, because we all do this. And again, I always like to say, it's not all women, it's not that men don't undermine themselves, but these are, broad tendencies. I mentioned in my field that when women are tapped and invited to step into the spotlight, they shy away. When I'm teaching public speaking and I'll say to you, come up here, and the reason I would do that is to put you on the spot, because when you're a public figure, you're put on the spot all the time. When you're a leader, you're put on the spot, and we need to acclimate our brains to be ready to be put on the spot and fake it or bluff it or get through, but not flinch. Women literally have a million ways of flinching with their bodies when you say, come up into the spotlight. And then, again, and these are like metaphors, but we do this in our heads in different ways, and I'm sure you can think of ways in the workplace that you flinch, essentially, or shy away when someone says, you lead this, right? When I have women give a talk about their accomplishments and then solicit a round of applause, when they get applause, they literally, their bodies cannot take it, and it's like they're being pelted with grapefruits, like, no. And so you literally have to train yourself, and posture is part of this, voice is part of this, to stand up straight and tall, treat yourself like a star, and show up, take the applause, step into the spotlight. So sidestepping the spotlight is one way of undermining. Other things women do is disavowing their expertise. We mentioned that, and something else that's my favorite peeve in a way, because I work with teaching women voice and presentation, is if you ask a woman what she's up to, she'll tell you the most boring things at great length in a run-on sentence, because she's talking really fast not to get interrupted, because no one's taught her how to forestall interruption, which we can get to. And it's like irrelevant, and at the very end she'll say something like, and I cured cancer. Or, and I won a Nobel Prize. And she swallows it. You can't hear it. It's like, what? What was that? And then you have to drag it out of them like pulling teeth. And it's exhausting. And it makes women, honestly, less fun to talk to than, privileged men who are raised to say, I'm Biff, and I'm a Rhodes Scholar, and I'm a this, and I'm a that, and I have a startup, and I'm a, within the first sentence, you know everything great about Biff that might lead you to want to find out more, invest in him, ask follow-up questions. But it's not exhausting. I mean, it can be annoying to talk to someone who doesn't know when to stop with that. That's the other side of the gender spectrum, right? But the pulling teeth till I find out what's valuable about you. And then it's astonishing when I teach this. Women are doing such amazing things, but you have to ask 6 exhausting follow-up questions before you get to it. So what I'm telling you is being a star gives you like a minute and a half of lead time when you've got someone's attention who could realize your dreams, promote you, invest in you, change your life. And if you don't lead with what's amazing about you, they will never know who you are, like literally never know who you are.
Can I say one of my pet
Please.
peeves? And I have a lot of compassion for this pet peeve, because I think that we have learned, any group of people that are disenfranchised, or when you're sort of in an environment where your group sort of isn't dominant, I think that you end up looking for strategies for being successful. And one of those strategies is understanding what are the rules and how do I follow them in order to get to where I want to get, right? And I think that we as women have collectively learned to follow the rules and to do them really well. And I also think it's no coincidence that that women have learned to follow the rules, for example, around academia. And so now we overrepresent in academia. There are more than 50% of all college students in the United States are women. And it's no coincidence, in my total opinion, that we have Peter Thiel now saying, guess what, college is not important. Drop out of college. Like, now that we're the majority, college doesn't matter. Thank you. And I do think that because we follow these rules, what ends up happening is we get really meticulous about reading and understanding the details and understanding what the landscape is. And what has happened to me a number of times is I'll think of a job that is perfect for someone. I'll send them the job description. I maybe didn't even read the job description, but I know the hiring manager and I know the person and I will make this connection and I think this person is perfect. And just, as a formality, I'm like, and here's the job description, check it out, I think it's perfect for you. And then I get a response back and she takes herself out of the game before anybody even takes her out of it. She says, I reviewed the job description, I looked at this thing over here, it says I needed 5 to 10 years of experience, I actually only have 3 to 5, I think that I don't actually qualify.
Wow.
So before anybody even takes her out of the game, she takes herself out.
That's
and I just finished, and the reason I sent this email is because you're amazing and I think you would be perfect for this job.
Right.
And apparently that's not enough.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to read through the finer details and basically take yourself out.
I'm just going to say you'll never propose something to her again, probably, unless she's your best friend.
Well, I have
So this is right. This is a great transition to things that happen in the environment. I don't want to say men, but often a male-dominated or any group-dominated environment creates minefields. So let's talk about some of those, and I'm going to direct this to you because I'm in a profession where I really didn't run into some of these things until 4 years ago when I began exploring the tech space because I'm in a profession in which the men I encountered were trying to help me say what I had to say better. So I didn't run into these things, and it was like 4 years ago I started to see these things I'd heard about my whole life, but the way you hear about like Bigfoot, it's a mythological thing. This thing about a woman will say something in a meeting and no one hears her, then a man says the exact same thing and everyone's like, Biff, what a great idea. I thought people were making that up, and I've seen it with my own eyes. I don't even understand the physics of it. How is it possible? But let's talk to you about some of those things.
Echo chambers. So we're coming at this from a radically different perspective, I find, but we're sort of meeting in the middle, and that is that this is new for you, whereas I grew up in that environment. And I think that now, looking back, one of the things that happens to me, and I think that it's a great maybe case for stepping away from your world. It's a great case for having diverse friendships and people that come from radically different places, is that until you step away from an environment, you don't actually realize what it was truly like with fresh eyes. And until I left tech, thinking I was burnt out by it and thinking I would never go back, and as you see, I have come back. I actually needed a good year or two to step away from it and look back and actually say, holy shit, that was a lot worse than I remembered it. And not only that, being in a position of leadership throughout most of my career, also realizing that this logic that I had where I was carefully picking my battles, where I said I don't want to be the annoying one that goes to HR all the time. I don't want to be the annoying one that causes trouble in every meeting. I don't want to be the one that frustrates people because she's calling them on things constantly. That picking of my battles now, hindsight being 2020, I really lament, because I realized that I didn't pick enough of those battles. And I also realized that as I was sort of leaving tech and suddenly being exposed to students who were then going into that world, the biggest thing for me, and the thing that probably broke my heart and made me rethink my decision, was that I realized that I hadn't left tech any better than I had found it. And now I was ushering a whole new generation of women, and I was throwing them into the lion's den. And so to me, the biggest lesson is that. The biggest lesson is I was too selective about which battles I picked. I should have picked more. I should have been more of an ass kicker. And now we can talk about some of these contextual things, but one of the things that you and I talked about in terms of one of the tools for how I might have done that and done that effectively and how I'm doing it now is creating allies, men and women, but especially groups of women who are tasked and explicitly coming together to support each other, to talk about what's happening as we're doing yearly reviews and mid-year reviews, to talk about very specifically salaries. I had one of the programs that we started at Athena is called the Mastermind Groups. We basically got 4 women entrepreneurs from campus, so students, and 4 women entrepreneurs from New York City, and we had them commit to a 9-month process of meeting on a monthly basis and basically having an accountability group. Every month we talked about what we were going to do in the following month, and also how we did with our goals from the previous month. Of course, it became a lot more than that. It became networking, it became, emotional support, it became sex talk, it became everything. But what ended up happening was one case in particular that you and I talked about that I thought was interesting. There was one day where one of the people at the table was talking about negotiating her salary, and we gave her sort of general platitudes because she gave us a general scenario. And by the end of the dinner, we just, she kept asking for more information, and it just seemed like we weren't really hitting it on the nail. And finally, somebody at the table, I think, said, will you just tell us what we're talking about? Like, what is the base salary? What are you asking for? How much? Can you just give us the numbers?
How much? Right, yeah.
And she did, and what we realized, and it was funny because you looked around at every single one of us at the table, the light bulb went out, went out on in our heads that we had given her all sorts of general and largely wrong advice, because actually what she was negotiating from was a really, really below market level. And so the strategies that we were giving her were assuming that she was at market and that she was being super ambitious trying to get an awesome raise. But in fact, she was at a place that was totally unjust, and the advice that we were giving her after we learned about the specific number was so radically different than what we would have given her otherwise that to me that was just a lesson from that is having a group of people who are your allies and support you, and committing to that on a regular basis, not something that you only have in a crisis. And second, being really, really specific about your scenarios, especially if they have to do with money.
Right. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now, just so that we've covered everything and can leave a lot of time for Q&A, we've got one more question, then let's open it up to Q&A, is I'm going to zip through the difficult things that a sometimes male-dominated environment can sometimes do. Interrupting, stonewalling, I mentioned taking credit for ideas, not giving credit to ideas, and an interesting strategy on the positive side, which Natalie just began, which is Allies Women's Networks, formal and informal networks. We found at Athena that women's networks like this one, but not just showing up at a conference, but having regular gatherings where you, off the record, literally help each other and ask each other for favors and give each other help. That actually makes a huge difference to women's advancement in a corporation or in their own projects. And you have to ask, what do you need? What can I do for you?
Which is something that we talked about briefly, that you had an example of somebody where you didn't make the ask.
That's right. So I'm a little bit of a slow learner in a new sector, and I had lunch with an investor that I wanted to cultivate for my startup. And I thought, because this is true in the nonprofit world, I'll have lunch with her, we'll bond, I'll have lunch with her, we'll bond. On the third time I see her, I'll let her know what the number is. The first, lunch I had, we were having a lovely time. About 15 minutes in, right after the soup, she said, "What can I do for you? What do you want?" And I was like a deer in headlights, because I had not been socialized to understand that this was a legitimate question. And so I said the stupid girly thing, which is, well, I just admire you so much, and I just wanted to get to know you. And she practically rolled her eyes and walked out of the restaurant. And she stayed the rest of the time, like literally you could hear her clock ticking, because I was wasting her time. I was wasting her time because I didn't just get to the point and tell her what I was doing there, which could be an opportunity for her. But at least it would, let her be able to categorize what I was doing in her life. And now I have to circle back and send her an email saying, this is what I want from you. But Natalie has been a mentor in getting me used to a culture that I was not acculturated to. And it's a culture that you should be acculturated to, and that we all should, because this is how powerful, I'm going to say white just because I watched them, but powerful men. I've watched a disproportionate number of powerful white men, because there's disproportionately, that's who runs the apex, but that hopefully is changing. They say they play basketball with each other. And this is, the guys who ran the White House when I was living in Washington would play basketball with each other once a week. It wasn't a game. They would literally be playing basketball and saying, "Biff, I need you to do this. All right, Jim, I'll do that, and I need you to do this." And that's all they did all Saturday morning. And by Sunday, they were running the United States of America. So we need to create those groups as well.
One of the
think
things that we
yeah.
talked about is that when you get in the habit, and this is how I have learned it, I would say more, as with many things, I learned it backwards. I learned, because I'm so strapped for time, to do what your investor friend did, where 15 minutes into a meeting is really long.
Oh, wow.
To be like, what can I do for you? What is the purpose of this meeting and why am I here? Usually it actually happens before the meeting happens. So in order to book time in my schedule, I actually need to know what the point is. Which I think is fair.
Yeah.
But I know it can seem a little bit abrupt. And one of the things that has done for me, though, is that it has made me better at, when I'm on the receiving end or on the opposite side of that, of being really clear and upfront. Like, this is what I need from you. And I don't know that I was as good at that until I was sort of on the other side.
And it's a good tip to prepare in advance that answer, what do I need? And to practice saying it. Like, I'm going around saying, I need X million dollars. And believe me, it took a few tries to habituate myself to saying, I need X million dollars. And now I just throw it out like, I need a haircut, I need X million dollars. All right, let's go quickly then into strategic vision and risk taking so we can open up the conversation. So again, the last piece of the Athena research we want to share with you is that women mentioned that they do not feel confident taking brave, bold risks and sort of thinking far ahead into the future. They're more focused on the here and now. And so we're going to zip through some strategies that we've seen about how to have comfort with strategic risk-taking. Go ahead.
So this week, you're not happy with time. I'm really happy with them at the moment, despite the typos in an op-ed that they just published of mine. But one of the people, and the person that is most mentioned in the op-ed is a woman by the name of Jordan Simmons. She's a student of mine. And I would say that she probably speaks to the biggest tool, which is courage and tenacity and persistence. So she was a sophomore in high school. She took her very first computer science class then, and it was AP Computer Science. She was the only African-American kid in the class, and she was the only woman in that class. And she doesn't care. She's Jordan. She's absolutely unstoppable. She took this class. She killed it. Midterms rolled around, and she aced her midterm. She got an A+. She finished the exam faster and qualitatively better than anyone else in the class, and her teacher accused her of cheating as a result. Yeah. And so despite that, though, and to the point of a strategy for this, she persisted. She applied. She got through that. She applied to one of the most sought after women's college in the country, and is now at an Ivy League school. She's studying computer science. She is one of those students that is not part of the 55% that have dropped off, within the first 2 weeks of computer science class. She's absolutely killing it, and she's a part of this program that I mentioned, Athena Digital Design. And she's phenomenal. And I would say that, I don't know if we teach that, if we learn that, if that's something that we're born with. But I do know that courage is something that we can do better with the right support structures.
That's a perfect note to end our part on, and we'd love to hear thoughts, observations, challenges, questions, but I think also at the time that we have, if you have concrete examples of things that you face or worry about or wonder about, we'd love to hear those as well. Yes, please.
Really easy.
I'm going to jump in and be an annoying coach. Can you stand up and speak really loud and clear, because this is part of our toolkit.
Sure.
Oh, and we
Thank
have
you.
mic.
And here's a mic.
Microphones, too.
Development.
There you go.
I'm Dana Good. I work at Stratus Product Development in Seattle. I'm a senior embedded software engineer. So my question has to do with perception and working with people, assertive versus aggressive, and how we try to be wherever that middle line is between those two, and no matter how hard we try, there are going to be people who take offense. What do you do when it's your manager? What do you do when it's the senior executives? You know you need to push, but you don't know how to make it work.
I'm going to direct that to you.
I'm really glad that before this session we were able to actually sit in on Mitra's section. I didn't get the whole thing, but one of the things that I loved that she said was she was basically saying you be you, which I know is a trite platitude that we hear all the time. But I do find that for me, and maybe this is a part of my personality, but I do think it's a part of more of our personalities than we like to let on, is we all have a sense of humor. And one of the strategies that has helped for me the most is to be unapologetically bold and assertive, and to have people complain that I'm too controlling or that I am too assertive. and to handle that criticism with humor, right? So sort of that, apologize rather than ask permission. Like, I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to pummel through the problem and make sure that, brute force or not, it's going to get resolved. But I'm going to try to be lighthearted and amusing and, fun to be in the room with when I'm getting that criticism, when I'm citing statistics about how, there was a class at Stanford that nobody wanted to work for Heidi because she seemed controlling and overbearing, but everyone wanted to work for Howard, and it was the same damn business.
Wow.
They just changed the name from Howard to Heidi. Isn't that funny? Ha ha. I think there's something to be said, and maybe that's me, and I have a slightly dark sense of humor, but I think we all have those personality traits that we maybe downplay in the workplace because we're trying to be what the stereotypical, what it means to be professional is. And then the other thing that I thought was great about what Mitra said is that there's a point where you do these different things, you do your best to move forward and work within the confines of the constructs that you're in, and if those don't work, sometimes you do have to move on and find places like Gene Sullivan
Gene Sullivan also said that. I'm chiming in and saying a legendary venture capitalist named Gene Sullivan struck me because I was interviewing her about what made her success possible, and she said that when people around her weren't nurturing and supporting her thriving, she would move on and create environments in which she could thrive. And that struck me so much because it's the opposite of the advice that women are giving, which is to adapt, to fit in, to solve the problem. And in terms of your question, I would say, and I've barely had a real job in my life, but nonetheless, that if you say it in a respectful but firm way and you give the reasons, and that's still seen as aggressive or a bitch or unacceptable. Well, first I want to say I've studied patriarchy and women's issues for 25 years, and often those kinds of criticisms are not given because anyone really cares about your affect, but because it's a way of keeping you down or stopping you or undermining you, A. And B, that I was so struck that Gene Sullivan's advice was move to where you can thrive if you can't fix it. So I would say that women tend to not take these risks of thinking, well, I've tried clearly to do X, Y, Z here. I've been respectful. My side of the street is clean. It's not working. I'm going to jettison this situation that's not good for me and find something that's good for me. Yeah.
Unfortunately, everybody, we are out of time for this session now.
Thank you very, very much. It's an honor to be here.